morning. Good morning. Welcome to North Anderson Community Church Presbyterian. Some of you, if you're new, may not know me. Do I have feedback? Oh my God.
You're good.
Okay. Some of you may not know me. Some of you may not remember me because I've been away for 3 weeks, just kind of traveling around, having fun with my family and that kind of thing. So I'm happy to be back and happy to see you. So first off, do we have any birthdays that we need to celebrate?
You were the only one who was trained to do that.
I know. Do we have any birthdays to celebrate?
Yeah, we have a birthday here.
Oh, happy birthday. Should we sing to Karen?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Karen. Happy birthday to you.
And do we have any announcements this morning?
I have an offer for you that you will not be able to resist. Wednesday evening, we were adopted by the cutest little orange striped kitten.
No!
Wait, there's more. I have 2 big dogs who are very interested in the small kitten. The kitten's feisty. It is a male. And I would love to have it come to a wonderful home that I know is sitting in this room right now as we speak. So let me know. I will deliver him and a bag of food.
A couple of things. There is session meeting today after church, so we'll get started just as soon as possible, and everyone is invited to come if you would like to. And I got a thank you note from Shriners Hospital thanking us for the tabs from drink cans. So continue to bring those in. They are used by Shriners, well, the money for it. I guess they do the recycling. Is that right? Tim? Michael, I'm sorry, Michael.
This past week, they took a load of can caps to local recycling. They weigh them and pay us, the hospital, so much per pound. They came back with a check just from can caps for $435, which is free money for the hospital. It includes people who don't have insurance, patient education, you name it. So keep on bringing them.
And I understand that because the tabs bring in more than the actual can does because it's like by weight. So that's why they do that. I
The
see.
amount of aluminum in that tab is almost more than what's in the can, they say, or something. And we would save the whole can, but we don't have room for the whole can.
But if you would bring them, and there is a large plastic container in the kitchen where we serve food, so you can just drop them down in there.
We don't
Wait,
survey
Lynn
anything.
needs to do teenagers.
Yes, okay. Teenagers will be meeting Friday at 11 a.m. It's this Friday. The Anderson Area Quilt Show will be held. It's every 2 years. The Anderson Group holds it, and it's sponsored by Prickly Fingers, Quilt Guild, and another one, Anderson Area Quilt Guild. It's really fun. There are over 200 quilts on display, beautifully made. There will be raffles, live demonstrations, all sorts of other things going on. So 11 at the Civic Center for the Quilt Show. Thank you.
I know y'all are wondering, what have I deposited in the church today for somebody to take? And so I will tell you, my CD collection is there. Don't have a CD player anymore. And most of what I had is in that room. Feel free to browse, help yourself. There's some relaxation CDs and classical music and all kinds of music in there. There's also a piece of pottery there that I'm not sure people understand what it is. It looks like it's a bud cake pan with a lid, and it's not. It's a steamer. And it was done by a potter who at least used to be in Pendleton. I don't know if they're still there. But you just put the what looks like a bud pan on top of a pot with boiling water, or water before it boils, and you can put your vegetables and everything around there. So that's what that is. I have a set of Service for 8 of bone china, which I rarely have used and probably don't need to cart to Minnesota with me. But if you know of anyone who would like that, my daughter-in-law called replacements, and they're not buying any more china right now because people aren't interested. But, you know, if you know somebody who's getting married, somebody who just lost stuff in a storm or whatever, let me know, because I'm not going to carry that around with me.
I was not going to let Cynthia have the first or have the last hand at a group of people who are working on the yard. So I formed, I'm going to call them the Wondrous Weed Whackers. And there were 6 of us. It was Cynthia, Joanne, Scott, help me out,
Polly.
me, Holly, and
Helen.
Helen.
And Lynn.
No, not Lynn.
No, I wasn't
And we met on Tuesday and Wednesday, and as you come up the walkway to the left, our garden had gotten quite unsightly. But now there are no weeds, and there is some mulch on it, and it looks wonderful. So please thank all of those weed whackers that came, and if you would like to join us, it's a lot of fun. So, and it will be needed again in probably a couple of days. No, not that soon, but maybe.
A week.
There'll be kudzu available in a couple of days. if you want.
Good, I was going to say, I'd like to offer this side of the room an opportunity.
Peanut Butter Whiskey Band is on the road again. Just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making music with my friends. This Thursday, Carolina Wren Park, 6 to 9, the Peanut Butter Whiskey Band is featured. Please come and support us. Oh yeah, we're tough. So bring your personal fan and a chair and a picnic and join us.
Nice. Will there be whiskey?
If you bring
In
it.
my bag.
Okay.
I think Linda was telling me I'm supposed to announce 3 nights of nature. Okay, so, not this week, but next week on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 7 o'clock. Everybody be here and bring all your friends. And we're going to have a tree whisperer. We're going to have a vertebrate person. We're going to have a stress management outdoor person. So come and hear what they have in terms of words of wisdom. Thank you. Oh, and bring us snack food so they'll have something for them to nibble on. That was it.
And the hundreds of people that will be there.
For the music, the 2 hymns, the first hymn will play all the way through before you sing. The closing hymn will play all the way through before you sing, and let's sing that closing hymn twice, and then you go back and repeat the refrain at the end. Also, there's a meditative chant after the sermon that Laura Collins brought to us last week, and Cynthia's going to lead it this week.
There were about 8 or 9 angels here yesterday morning came to church. So, silent
been a, wild summer with what's been happening politically. And last evening, it really took a very dark turn. And kind of as I responded to the news, being someone who's not a supporter of Trump, I had a variety of thoughts and emotional reactions. And upon reflection, some of them I wasn't really very proud of. And I think that really kind of draws to attention sort of how complex we are and how complicated we are. And that as we arrive everywhere we go, we're bringing our whole selves, and that's messy and can be contradictory. And so what I wanted to do this morning before we got started was something that I tried before one time, is as we came in, we've all been very friendly and jovial and joking around and that kind of thing. And that's wonderful, and this community provides that. But we each bring more than that, right? We bring this complicated mess. So what I would like to do is take 4 minutes, and I'd like you to find a neighbor and just tell them how you are arriving today at this meeting. I'll kind of let you know when 2 minutes has passed, and you can kind of switch. And when you're not speaking, if you would just be a generous listener to your neighbor. So please turn to your neighbor and tell them how you're arriving today. next to you. And with that, let us worship God. And one more.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Let us join together in our call to worship that you find in our bulletin today. Children of God, welcome.
Welcome to this place of love and grace.
Welcome to this place of hope and perseverance.
The Holy One invites all of us to be part of the beloved community.
The Holy One invites all of us to share in the good news.
We are welcome just as we are. We are loved just as we are.
In gratitude for all of this, let us worship. Our opening hymn is number 301, Let Us Build a House. All are welcome. You may stand or sit as you prefer as we sing together. seated. I want to say thank you to Sarah for opening us today in such an appropriate way. I am a bit of a procrastinator. My lessons are always done on Sunday for the week, Monday through Friday. Some of you don't know I'm an English teacher. That's my high school English teacher. Last year, my principal said, we think it'd be a great idea to have you turn your lessons in 2 weeks in advance.
Wow.
I did that one time in the academic year. Thankfully, my test scores were great, and so she didn't bother me. I tell you all of this to say, yesterday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I was at the car dealership having work done on my car, finishing my sermon in their waiting room. I love where I take my car because they have a Starbucks machine. And so you can get your Starbucks coffee, do your work there. It's wonderful, get a couple hours. And I finished my sermon. I wouldn't say I felt great about it, but I thought, well, I have something to say. And I had dinner plans last night with my daughter and her husband, and Julie, my niece, and so I felt good. I can go relax and enjoy dinner. And then, as we were gathering for dinner, the news came about the shooting at President Trump's rally. And I had intended to read to you a passage today from Ephesians that was really filled with a lot of stuff that many of you would have real problems with. And I wanted to do that on purpose. It had blood atonement in it. It had predestination and all kinds of things like that. And the first line in the sermon that I intended to give was to say, I know that some of you who have, like me, a more progressive sort of faith probably have the heebie-jeebies right now. And I even looked up where the words heebie-jeebies came from. And they come from a 1920s comic strip from the same author who gave us the word horse feathers. But after I heard what had happened yesterday evening, I decided I really didn't want to take you on a clever, what I thought was clever, you might not have thought it was clever, a clever exploration of a text that at first doesn't seem very appropriate to us, and yet maybe there is something in it that's helpful. But I do want to share one verse of what I had intended to read today. And then in good North Anderson spirit, I'm going to share with you some texts from other sources today. At the end of the passage I had intended to read today, it says, the Holy Spirit is the down payment on our inheritance, which is applied toward our redemption as God's own people, resulting in the honor of God. And what I had intended to get to in my sermon was this notion that we are, each and every one of us, made in the image of God. And I was going to push back on that phrase that we sometimes use in our lives when we make mistakes. We say things like, well, I'm only human, as though I can only do so much. I'm only human. And I was going to point out the fact that in the story of one of the stories of creation, the thing that we are created to be is only human. To be human is to be made in the image of God. And that means that when I look at myself with all of my contradictions and my brokenness, my mistakes and my successes, I am, no matter what, made in the image of God. I was going to tell you the story about a woman that I met in her 70s who, for the first time, went on a mission trip with a doctor in our congregation. They went to Jamaica, but not the touristy part of Jamaica. They went to rural villages, and she was a pharmacist, and he was a doctor, and they cared for people in their brokenness. And she came back to me at 70 and said, I feel alive for the first time. At 70. Because she looked into the eyes of people she would never have seen and recognized them as the children of God. I was going to tell you this story that I think is so humorous from Tony Campolo, who talks about walking across the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, and he says, I came to a street corner, and coming up alongside me was a woman we called the Duck Lady. She was called the Duck Lady because she hung out every day on the campus lawn, and she quacked. She had some issues in her life, but she would walk across the campus, quack, 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 quack. And Professor Campola said there she was next to me, quacking away. We were waiting for a light to change. The light was red. And while we were waiting, I turned to her and she turned to me. And in one of those moments, he said, our eyes met. And I looked her deeply in the eye and said, it's a lovely day. And she stopped quacking and said, it really is. It's a lovely day. And then she continued to quack. Seeing one another as made in the image of God. But I'm not going to give you that sermon today. Instead, I would like to share a few words that I heard this weekend by a social scientist that you may have heard of before named Robert Putnam. Robert Putnam wrote the book Bowling Alone several years ago, and he talks in that book about isolation in the American culture. He talked about how people used to join bowling leagues, and now people bowl alone. And in his teaching, he was interviewed by the New York Times this weekend on a podcast that I really love called The Daily. Every day they do a podcast on the news, Monday to Friday. But on Saturday, they interview someone. And Robert Putnam is now 89, but he's still talking about how we isolate ourselves from one another. And he talks about two forms of social capital in our world. The first is something he calls bonding social capital. So that is the kind of capital that we build with people who look like us, think like us, live close to where we do, have similar interests. That is our bonding social capital. And so he says, I'm an elderly, male, white, Jewish professor. And when I'm around other older, male, white, Jewish professors, I'm forming bonding social capital. But he says, there's another kind of social capital called bridging social capital. And it's when you increase your ties with people unlike yourself. And so he says, when I spend time with people from a different generation or a different religion or different politics or whatever, I am building my bridging social capital. And then he said something very interesting. He said, now suddenly I am no longer a social scientist, but I'm a preacher. And I'm trying to say that we're never going to fix our polarization, our inequality, our social isolation until, first of all, we start feeling that we have an obligation to care for others, no matter what. And then he said, but that's not easy to do as a society. Don't even ask me how to do it. And then he continued to talk about politics in America. He identified himself as a liberal Democrat. But he also talked about how his work on isolation in the American society has been supported by people on both sides of the aisle. And so he says, I found myself in rooms with people not as a partisan, but as a person who's advocating, arguing for more bridging social capital. And then he talked about today, the current climate. And he says, part of what's happened is we've gotten to a place where we only do bonding social capital, and we no longer see the merits of bridging social capital. Bonding social capital means we gather with people like ourselves. We gather with people who think like us. And not only, he said, do we exclude other people, we also vilify them. We vilify them. That interview popped in my head yesterday when I heard what had happened. And it is not the first instance where something like this has happened in our recent months. And so I thought, what should I say? Barb and I were talking in our little opening that Sarah let us in. We both talked about how last night we went to bed after watching the news and then just couldn't go to sleep. And got back up and watched some more and tried to go back to sleep. What are we going to do to start building social capital? What can this little community here do to start building social capital and not vilifying those with whom we disagree? Disagreement is needed. I'm not suggesting that we don't disagree, but I am suggesting that we don't disagree to the point of eliminating the other. Because, as Paul's letter, or whoever wrote the thing, Ephesians, reminds us, we're all made in the image of God. And so I decided this morning, on the fly, to bring to you one word. And that word is humility. And I'm borrowing from one of my former professors, a woman named Roberta Bondi, who used to teach at Emory University's School of Theology. And she wrote a little book several years ago that I fell in love with. It's called To Love as God Loves. And she, in this book, explores some of the teachings of the church's first monastic communities. So that when Christianity became more acceptable and more respectable were some groups of people who thought that Christianity became too easy because of its acceptability. And so they moved out into the desert and began to set up little monastic communities to try to give themselves seriously to the work of modeling their lives in the ways of God. Now, we have to be careful because humility has often been misunderstood as seeing yourself as inferior. You know, you can sometimes think of humility as like cowering in the corner, not speaking up for yourself. Humility has been used in the history of the church and in the history of civilization to tell women, know your place. Be humble. That's not the definition of humility that I'm looking for. Humility just means that we recognize that just as we are made in the image of God, so are our neighbors. We are not some heroes in comparison to all other human beings. We are humble in the sense that we are connected. So I want to share today just a couple of teachings of the early church monastics. And think about, and to invite you to think about with me, our own sense of humility in the midst of this national tragedy. The early monastics used to tell stories, and so Dorotheus of Gaza told this story to remind us that sometimes even the small things we do matter. He says, suppose there are two ladders, one going upward to heaven and the other leading down to hell. You are standing on the earth between the two ladders. You would not reason it all out and say, how can I fly from the earth and be once and for all on top of the ladder? This is impossible. And God does not ask it of us. But God does ask that we meanwhile keep from going downwards and do not harm our neighbor or demean him. And so at last we begin to do a little good and are of help to him or her in speech and bear with them. And if they need something, give to them freely so that we go up the ladder one rung at a time until finally, with God's help, we reach the top of the ladder. For through this repeated coming to your neighbor's rescue, you come to long for what is advantageous for him as well as advantageous for yourself. This is what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. Humility, taking care of our neighbor, even the neighbor with whom we disagree. Some of the early monastics taught us that even when we fail, we are loved. A soldier asked one of the church fathers if God accepted repentance. And after the old man had taught him many things, he said, tell me, my dear friend, if your coat is torn, do you throw it away? Now, this doesn't work very well in our society and in our culture, because if our coat is torn, what do? We we tend to throw it away, right? We live in one of these like throwaway cultures. I have my students every year read an article on fast fashion. Do you know what that is? So Shein fast fashion? No? Some of you do. Shein fast fashion is disposable clothing. You buy it to wear a couple times and then you throw it away. It's really cheap. It's cheaply made. How's it cheaply made? It's cheaply made by mistreating workers. And, yeah, so don't try to get rid of that mindset. Go back into the, years 350 and think, if your cloak is torn, do you throw it away? And that person said, no, I mend it, I fix it, and use it again. And then the wise spiritual father said, if you are so careful about your coat, will not God be equally careful about God's creatures? Humility. Humility. I love this story. One of the fathers came one day to eat in a place where there was a monk of evil repute. Now it happened, the story goes, that a woman came and entered the cell of the brother of evil reputation. A woman came in where the monk was. The dwellers of that place, having learned this, were troubled, and they gathered together to chase that brother away. Knowing that the spiritual father, the leader, the bishop was in their community, they asked him to join them as they disciplined this brother and chased him out of the community for carousing with a woman. When the brother in question heard that they were coming, he hid the woman in what the story says is a large cask. Yes, container. So that when the monks came in to investigate, they would not find the woman. And the bishop, the spiritual father, came in to the room of the monk. Guess where he sat? On the cask. And when the other brothers could not find the woman, their case fell apart, and they left. And actually, before they left, the bishop said, "What is this? You have no evidence? You have no proof?" And they left. And then the bishop said, "Brother, be on your guard." And he walked away. Now there is a man with humility. He wasn't overlooking the issue with his priest, with his brother. But nor was he going to embarrass him in front of the community. Humility. Humility. These little stories popped in my head today as I thought about yesterday and as I think about our future. We must be an example of what it means to love one another and never wishing ill will even on people we disagree with the most. Because that is not the way of God. Doesn't mean we don't disagree vehemently or fight for the justice of those we love. But we are made in the image of God. but so are those around us. Last story. You've heard this one before, some of you. One of the desert teachers said that our lives are like being on the circumference of a circle. And as we strive toward being better people, we strive toward knowing God or the light or whatever you are most comfortable saying. Steve Morgan's not here, so I don't have to be quite as careful about my God language. But, you know, and so this desert teacher said, think about the divine being in the center of this circle. And all of us are on the outer part of the circle, moving ever closer to the divine and to our intended purpose. But then this desert teacher said, but notice that the only way to get closer to the center of the circle, closer to God, closer to the divine, closer to our true identity, is by